Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Pursuit Podcast. I'm your host, Grayson Garvin. At the Pursuit, we believe fear is the enemy and real focus, hard work, and perseverance is what it takes to win. In this week's episode, I sit down with my former college baseball coach, Tim Corbin. Coach Corbin is a two-time national champion and many times over SEC and National Coach of the Year. More than his accomplishments on the field, though, he is a teacher who takes it upon himself and the program to raise boys to men as they develop on and off the field at Vanderbilt. It won't take long to hear thoughtfulness and intentionality permeating throughout the entire conversation, which is a direct correlation to Coach Corbin's success. So without further ado, let's get to it. All right, Coach Corbin, good morning. Welcome to the Pursuit Podcast. I am thrilled to have you here this morning.
Thank you, Grayson. It's good to be with you and good to see you again. And spending time with a former player is always cool.
Well, it's special for me. I mentioned this a little bit offline that, to be honest, a lot of the content here stems from a lot of the work that I feel like you did in my life and with many others. So we appreciate you coming on, especially to breeding the snow. I see behind you. Folks can't see in my window, but we're dealing with a little bit of a snow apocalypse here in Nashville, Tennessee. And we don't do snow very well down here in the South. So the town is really shut down. But anyway, glad that we could do this. And I was thinking, Corbs, to be honest, about kind of our time together and going back throughout our relationship. I feel like I've told you this story before, but I still remember, and this story kind of rings true in my life, and I feel like a lot of others. I still remember the phone conversation when I committed to Vanderbilt to play baseball. And I don't know how many, this may be something that you tell a lot of guys, but I remember committing. I remember the excitement in your voice, but I also remember one thing that you said on that phone call. You said, Grayson, you're making a lifetime decision. And I didn't really have any concept for an idea of what that meant at the time, but it really rings true in what you've developed at Vanderbilt and the friendships that I have and the commonality that we have with so many guys. So I'm really excited to allow you to tell a little bit more of your story and what's really been created at Vanderbilt to allow you to be able to say things like that. So again, thanks for coming on today.
My pleasure.
Well, Corbs, to start, walk me through a little bit from, back before, you started coaching. What specifically for you made you want to get into coaching and want to pour into to young men like me, for decades?
Well, I've certainly been asked that question a bunch of times, and I think, and this is what I remember, and this is I remember communicating this, but I always wanted to be a teacher. I think for me growing up, especially with my dad had been in the military, albeit a short time. I think the two things that resonated with me were my dad's speaking of the military in our home, and also the teachers and coaches that I met early on in my career. And I think both those things were very vibrant in my mind in terms of, I either want to go into the military or I want to teach. So teaching was something that was on my radar, unless I did go in the military, but I didn't have the opportunity to do that, nor did I make that opportunity. So I went into teaching. But I think even before that, I developed a street hockey league when I was 12, 13 years old. So organizing and putting teams together and being part of teams were something that I liked, but it was always on my mind when I left school, was just getting outside, developing teams, being part of something, and one day potentially coaching. But I think the teaching thing was first, and then the coaching thing came after. But I got a degree in it, and I was a school teacher for a short amount of time and a high school coach. And then one thing led to another. And then I was fortunate enough to get into college coaching. And then from, Ohio State to Wofford to Presbyterian to Clemson to Vanderbilt, that's been my trek. But I think the thing I'm proudest of is the fact that I've been able to play, teach, and coach at all levels, whether it's high school, Division III, Division II, NAIA, or Division I. And I think I certainly developed a deep sense of gratitude because of being at all different levels, all different levels too of commitment and what they had, just not a lot of resources at some of those places. But I appreciated that because it created a fertile proving ground for me as a teacher.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, again, you speak to that a little bit. You mentioned all of the different levels. And I think back to so many things that you did and really instilled in us through my time at Vanderbilt. And again, I think the program has a lot more resources now than it even did when I was
Yeah.
playing. But, I still remember, and there's countless examples, but I still remember the importance that you placed on baseballs lying around amongst the field, right? It's like you you equated there's a baseball at that point cost $5. It costs a lot more now, but a baseball's $5, and you would walk around, and if there were baseballs lying around the field, it's Grayson, that's $5 right there. You need to pick it up, and it has a home, and it has a place to go. The same thing for gloves and bats and cleats and everything. And I think it goes back again to your teaching mindset where you're not, at that point it's just one baseball, right? But to be honest, when you really get down to a foundational point, it's about a lot more, right? It's about discipline, and it's about appreciating the things that you've been given. And, in some ways, that's a very small microcosm of the type of environment and the type of community that you've really built here.
Right. I think everything has value. And whether it's a baseball, whether it's a glove, whether it's a trip that you take as a team trip, whether it's a relationship, there's tremendous value to everything that you're doing and everything that you have. And I think when you lose the gratitude, when you lose that value and you feel like it's going to be there, it's gonna show up, then you're really losing your innocence for what you have and why you have it. And I think, growing up, my family didn't have a lot. And I think what was important is back when Greg and I, my brother, when we were in elementary school and then the seventh grade, you started grade school, which was part of the high school. And my dad and mom said, when you guys start grade school, you're going to work. So working was was part of our school experience too. So we both ended up working at a restaurant, and my dad was in the automotive parts business. So we did that during the course of the summer. So while we were playing sports, we were also working. But I do know the reason my dad did that is because he wanted us to understand the value of a dollar. And he wanted to understand that you'll value that dollar more when you have to work for it. When you don't have to work for something, you just assume it's going to show up. So those fibers are certainly something that has stayed with me. And obviously, to your point, I communicate that now today, and that will never stop. I mean, when these kids arrive on campus, we don't put them in a locker room right away. I mean, it takes a long time before they get into that locker room. But I want them to have the understanding of what it's like to rent something before you own it, because that's part of life. That's just something that's going to happen to them too. Very rarely do you get into a situation where you own it right away. You don't own your position here, you rent that. You don't own your seat. I don't own my seat. This can be taken from me at any point in time. Vanderbilt always come over and say, you know what, coach, your time's over. And I think my level of innocence is such where the only way I can repay someone for what I have is just by showing up and ready to take ownership of it every day. And if I don't, then I'm losing my gratitude for what I have. And I'm not going to do that. But I don't want the people around me to feel that way either. Not that they have to be me or think like me, but at the same time, we're all very lucky to have what we have. And your way of showing respect and gratitude for it is just by bringing the best you can every day.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wasn't necessarily going to take the conversation in this direction, but what you mentioned, it brought
Mhm.
up another thought in my mind. And I think that this is the case in society, right? It's like we always, I think, want better for our kids than what we had, right? And that's always, in some ways, I think it's striving for, a parent is they want to create something great for their kids
Mhm.
in the life cycle of the program. The program when you took over is in a very different place now than what it was back in the early 2000s, or even when I played in the late 2000 2008, 2009, 2010, trying to maintain that same level of gratitude for the team. What additional steps have you taken now that, again, the program is at a very different place, a different kind of kid, a different level of facilities and resources and things like that? How does that look different for you when you have a new incoming team, in August?
Well, I think because we have more, Grayson, and you obviously are part of that. I mean, there's all these, this is my 22nd year. And I look at all these classes being tied together. One thing doesn't happen unless one thing before it happened. And so all of this is just a stream and a circle of connection. But I think because we've had good consistency and we have gained more resources along the way, then the standard has become firmer. It's become higher. And I say not standard of winning. I talk about, well, yeah, I guess so. Standard of winning behaviors inside of the program. And that that's just become to me, it's something that I don't want to loosen up because I feel like with success comes upon maybe the recruitment of players that I don't know, from a talent standpoint, may have been greater in talent than they were 15 years ago or 10 years ago. But that also brings upon an element of expectation. And there's no expectation. It's like you come into this program, you're basically protecting what's been built because you have these new players that come in, they haven't built any of this, they're renting it too. So what their job is to basically make it better than how they found it. And that's been said plenty of times, but it's actionable. It's in, I think part of my teaching abilities is to bring that to light. And how is it actionable? And what does it look like? And what does it look like every day? And I think, just leaving a facility better every single day. We call it recruiting ready, where if anyone stepped into this facility or field at any point in time, it would look recruiting ready. It would look like, okay, they just opened it up. And I think that that's the nature of just being grateful and keeping things at a higher standard than you did the year before. So yeah, that's how it's been.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Again, and obviously I know that I've lived it, but I think it's important for those that are listening to this to hear again the level of intentionality with which you're taking, shepherding these kids through the program, whether they're here 1 year or 4 years or 5 years. I think it's really important. So to go back to Corbs to, again, a little bit of your story, again, so you mentioned a little bit of your trajectory coaching wise, so from a head coaching perspective, you're a Presbyterian, then, again, you stepped at Clemson, which again, for those of you that don't know, Clemson is a baseball powerhouse. The coaches on that coaching staff are heavy hitters. And then you were positioned or presented with an opportunity to come and be the head coach at Vanderbilt at a program at that time that was a little bit faltering. What specifically caused you to step into the program here on West End and really feel like there was a good trajectory to be able to have success moving forward?
Uh, it was the private school background that was intriguing to me, Grayson, because of my background. Although we didn't have a lot of money, I went to high school, just a very country high school. But uh, my back in the Northeast, what is popular there is going to school another year of high school, which they call postgraduate education. I got the opportunity to do it because I didn't think I was ready for college personally, and I needed to grow up and I needed to mature. And these postgraduate schools are very good academically. So I got a private school education there, went to Ohio Wesleyan, which was another private school. So my value for education and my value for the people in it was heightened. And Presbyterian private school, Wofford private school, Clemson, very good state school academically. And I think what it did is it basically made me feel like those are the kids I want to be around. Those are the type of student athletes I want to be around. So, when I was at Clemson for 9 years, Maggie and I thought, this is where we're going to be. If Coach Leggett will allow us to be an assistant, we'll be here as long as we possibly can. And we did feel like we were going to be there for a long period of time. We had job opportunities. I think there were 5 different job opportunities that came. Nothing really was fitting. And then we went to one school in the West that had a very prominent baseball program. But we went there, we did the interview, they offered us the position, but there was no real conversation about academic growth. So we turned it down. And within 24 hours, Vanderbilt called. And I didn't know much about Vanderbilt other than the fact that it was a real good academic school. So after the College World Series back in 2002, Maggie and I came here. We spent a day here. And when we got back to the hotel that night after the process of interviewing, we both said, you know what, if Vanderbilt were to offer us this job, we would both take this. This is something that we enjoy. We fit. I think more about, and this would apply to you too, is like anywhere you go in life, it's not so much the job position, it's about the fit of the job position with your personality. And we both felt like this would be a great place to coach. And the reason it would be a great place to coach is because there was a high emphasis on intelligence. And intelligence to me, a lot of times equated with consistent behaviors. Consistent behaviors equates into some type of success, whatever that may be. So we took the opportunity and obviously, certainly glad we did.
Yeah, absolutely. So at that point, what's the foundation in which you wanted to build the program from, excuse me, because again, it started at a place, again, I would say that the culture was a little bit faltering. There wasn't really a history of winning here. You had to come in and really set a new expectation of what it meant like to be a Vanderbilt athlete, a Vanderbilt baseball player, a Vanderbilt student, all of those things. So what were, one or two of kind of the foundational points that you really wanted to instill in those early teams?
The level of investment that it takes in order to be really good at something that you want to do. It's one thing to convey it and to communicate it. It's another thing to really invest in it mentally, emotionally, and physically. And that takes a tremendous amount of energy and courage because in order for you to break away from you, as people, we feel like we're really doing something really well. We're putting a lot of time into it. But the reality is there's a lot of people working at a certain level. And I'm not going to say average, I would say even at a good level. But then to do something way better than good, to be great, to be extraordinary, it takes a lot of investment. And I just felt like when I got here, that was what needed to be A, modeled and B, expected. And I felt like if it was modeled and expected, we would take steps. I didn't know how large those steps would be, Grayson. And I listen, I wasn't one either that said, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. I didn't come in here making any declarations because I knew that I had enough awareness to know that that was stupid. What was most important is just getting in here, putting your head down, and then doing the best you could with what you had. And it wasn't asking for a lot. It was just like, how could you ask for something if you haven't done anything? So basically, with myself, Coach Backage, back then it was Derek Johnson, who's now the pitching coach of the Cincinnati Reds, and a guy named Mike Holder, who's the head coach at South Carolina Aiken. We had 4 really good guys and we had a hell of a time doing it. It was, it was very time consuming, but at the same time, we enjoyed what we did and we certainly were able to take incremental steps forward.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to that. I don't know if I've ever even told you this story. I came from a fairly rigorous high school. I would say that what I thought was worked hard in high school, both academically and athletically. I still remember stepping on campus as a freshman and calling my parents on the verge of tears pretty often my freshman fall. Because at that point, again, I knew in some ways a certain level or what it was going to require to be successful where I came from. But to your point, is you don't necessarily know what it's going to require to be successful at the next
Yeah.
level. And I think what happens, and I still would say that this is one of the most important life skills that I was taught through Vanderbilt, was that the expectations that I would say the program has for everyone where you step into, ultimately when you graduate, become the expectations that you have for yourself. And
Mhm.
that's where things really start to get fun and really start to get interesting. But without the competition, without the accountability, without the team around you, it's really impossible to instill that kind of behavior or that type of mentality in each other.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think there's a couple of things I'm thinking about when you're talking and doing it, and you've heard this, is going from independence to interdependence, where you're dependent upon a group of people around you only raises the level of water to raise your abilities as well. I mean, it's one thing to do something on your own. It's another thing to do something amongst peers who are driven too, because they start walking alongside of you, and that energy and that buildup of energy of doing something as a group certainly heightens. I think the other thing about the military, and I've never been a military person, so I can't speak to it. I All I can do is speak to it from listening to it, being reading about it. But what I know to be true is that when you join the military, at least at the basic levels, everyone is at the same foundation. And I think the recreation of this program every year is getting everyone back down to the same foundation and raising that level together. And it doesn't matter if it's me, if it's Brownie, who's been here 12 years, if it's an equipment person, trainer, a freshman. Once you get into this environment here, I think we do a really good job of creating balance that, okay, once you get into this room and once you get into this space, then forget your title. Whatever your title is, just throw it out the window because it matters nothing now. Everyone will have a role, but the titles are gone because really what you're doing is you're jumping into this situation and you're trying to better yourself, but better it. And it's very holistic. And by doing that, it seems to take the talents of the individual to a greater level than if you were trying to do something by yourself.
100%. I think, again, there's the saying, it's like you can go far alone, but you're going to go farther and faster, together. And I think that that's important
Yeah.
to, recognize. So stepping to the next, phase of the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about, I was reading a book the other day and they titled it The Messy Middle. Where, again, it's easy to start something. You kind of have wind in your sails. There's a little bit of, sexiness, again, you're a new coach in the SEC, you step into, really rebuilding culture at a program, and obviously now we can look back and say, okay, we've had, so many College World Series appearances. There's a banner right there of the first one. Again, you have so many national championships. It's easy to look at the success now. But I want to talk a little bit about the messy middle to where, again, you're building and maybe you're not where you want to be yet, whether that's wins and losses, whether that's the culture of the program. You're not getting out of the team what you want to get out of them interpersonally or on the field. Walk me through a little bit about how it felt, say, oh, say '07 to 10, right? Where, again, the program is, really starting to solidify itself as a prominent powerhouse, but really haven't eclipsed where I think we wanted to be on the field, and I don't know how you would have equated that off the field, but walk me through just kind of internally how that felt and how you kind of processed through that and got kind of over that threshold.
I think it's just the power of patience. It's, when you first come in, and again, I, I would never tell anyone this at the time, but it is a little bit intimidating to take on an SEC baseball program and try to better it than what it was or what it is. But I think the thing that I was maybe gifted is that, I had I had the ability just to get into something and just work at it. And regardless of whether we were getting a lot of no's from a recruiting standpoint, or we were getting a lot of lopsided scores on the scoreboard initially, yes, I would get frustrated by it initially, but I always had the ability just to come back. It's like, okay, so what? Let's go. I had pretty good comeback ability personally. And I think it's just like putting those years together and stacking those years, stacking the days first, and then stacking those years where, 2003 led to 2004. Well, what 2003 was we were basically a 500 program. Our goal was simply to go to the SEC tournament because we hadn't been in 16 years. So it was just incremental growth. Let's see if we can get to that tournament this year. Create a vision for the group. Let them know that it's quite possible that we could celebrate at the end of the year on the field at the last pitch, and then get on the bus and go to Birmingham, play in an SEC tournament. Well, as fate would have it, we did. We hit a walk-off home run against another team to go to the SEC tournament for the first time in 16 years. And it was like that vision that we created and we made it actionable just led to 2004. We were 2 games away from going to Omaha. But then, we dipped a little bit in 2005. And it was just the ability just to keep going. That if you're, the metaphor of climbing a mountain is true. It's like you climb a mountain, but as you're climbing, you may fall a couple times and go back down another 15, 20, 30 feet, and you just got to start that climb back up again. And it was a lot of those steps. And you get to 2007 and you had a really, really good year. But at the end of that year, it felt like, you know, we were ranked number one in the country for like 12 weeks out of the 15 weeks. And we hosted a regional for the first time, but we got beaten in our own regional, the number one seed in the country. And that was a tough pill to swallow. And I remember Coach Winkin, he was 80 years old, John Winkin, former head coach at Maine. He was the NCAA rep here. I loved him. I wanted to play for him. And we went to breakfast after getting beaten by Michigan to go to the super regional. And Maggie and I were there with him. And this guy's gruff, will say anything. He's honest, but I loved him. And I said, Coach, what do you think? He said, I knew you'd lose. And I said, what? He said, yeah, I knew you guys would lose. And I said, why did you know we would lose? He says, by the way you practiced on Thursday night. And I said, I thought we had a pretty good practice. He goes, oh yeah, you had a good practice. He goes, but you were nervous and so weren't your players. And he said, you'll win someday. But he says, not right now. He said, you'll need to get better in that area. And he was so right. Like that was like a knife to my heart back then. But the guy was so right. It was like, yeah, we were making more of it than we should have. But, without that loss, Grayson, we might not get to the College World Series in 2011 with you. Without getting to the College World Series in 2011, we might not have that spectacular year in 2013 where we hardly lost, but didn't get to a College World Series. But without 2013, we don't win in 2014. So they are all connected. Experiences are connected. And you don't know it at the time, and they're painful at the time. But when you look back, you go, it's almost like the journey's always better than the destination, but
Mhm.
sometimes you don't know that or acknowledge that until you get to the destination. And then you look back and say, well, the journey was much better than how it feels right now. I mean, winning a gold trophy and winning a national championship is great. But the reality is you want that to wear off too within 2 days. It's like, no, I enjoyed the trip much more than I enjoyed this final game here. So that's what it was.
No, I love that. And to speak too about what Coach Winkin said, going back to 2007, I still remember, and this is one of the things that, again, you do such a great job of is you try to equip the team to be able to self police themselves. And then you, in some ways, kind of step back into the periphery. And I think that that was really true about that 2011 team, specifically
Mhm.
because we were an older group. We had been around, we had been to a regional, we had been to a super regional, and you, I think, you had a level of comfort and a level of respect and trust of us that I don't necessarily felt in my freshman and sophomore year. And I think that that equated to positive results on the field. And then obviously, again, we go to Omaha and that was fun. And, obviously you've been several other times, won national championships, but it's been cool, again, to hear that story. It's not the first time I've heard it, but then to see the way that, you were able to adapt and change and what that really became, again, through the outcomes on the field. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really trusting your players. You get into that point, but I don't know if it's just youth or lack of ego or lack of confidence in myself to get to that point where you start trusting your players. Because when you do trust them, then better things happen and you empower them. Uh, this is my senior year in high school. We weren't doing anything New Year's Eve. My dad goes, "Let's go to Boston." And so, just on a flyer, we drove down to Boston like at night and got there in time to watch the ball drop. But as we were going on the trip, before we went on the trip, I said, It's a great idea, but you and mom, you get in the back seat, let me and Greg drive." And I said, "You enjoy the trip." And he did. He let us drive down there. We had a hell of a time. But always remember that because that's really where you get to as a coach. It's like when Grayson Garvin comes up to you his junior year and says, Coach, get in the back. Let us grab the keys. Let us drive. Let us take this the rest of the way." And then when you give Grayson the keys and you guys start driving, you do enjoy it because you get in the back. It's like, okay, you got them to this point. Now it's theirs. It's the teams. It's their trip. Don't take the trip away from them. They busted their ass to get to this point. Give them the opportunity to win it or lose it. Regardless of what happens, just give them the opportunity, but stay the hell out of the way. And I think you got to have confidence in yourself or get to that point where you have confidence in yourself where you go, this is no longer your program. And if you're sharing it, but it's theirs and let them have this time where they can appreciate it.
Well, I think it's hard as a human, right? We desire control because in some ways I think that feels better in some weird way. But again,
Yeah,
what you're speaking to is the fact that oftentimes when we've done the hard work and been intentional to pour into the people that we need to pour into, what actually feels the best and actually creates the best results is when we kind of open our hands and are allowed to
that's right.
let go. There's a freedom that exists there. It's really cool.
That's right. Yeah, no doubt.
So this is a podcast too, Corbs, a little bit about success. And, talking about success, I like the term because it means different things to different people. And I would imagine that for you, the definition of success has probably changed over time. And so in the highs and lows, in the wins and losses of, your coaching career, your life, um, how would you frame success now for you as you sit here in 2024?
Well, now it's probably a whole lot different than it was 20 years ago, Grayson. Just because I've learned at least, or at least gained a better perspective of what it looks like over time. But I well, first off, I don't think of success much. I think more about happiness. I feel like if I, if I'm personally happy and the people around you are happy, then that's really ultimately the best feeling. Because happiness is where people can really do their best work. But if success was the key, then I'd say it's just creating and or facilitating an environment where people can grow, develop, and do their best work. And I think through that, there's a comfort level of the people around that goes, I enjoy being there. I enjoy what I do. I enjoy the people I do it with. I'm happy with what I do. That to me feels right. And if right is success, then that's good. That's good with me. I think, obviously winning is extremely important for the kids, extremely important for us too. Put a lot of time and effort into it. But Jesus, it's like, i- and I've told this story a bunch of times. That's where the biggest hang up was for me because it would dictate how I felt about the program and it dictate how I felt about myself. And I remember that time that the depression of the end of the year was lasting too long. And my wife and I were on a trip and she said, you know, you got a lot of growing up to do. And, you know, I asked her, what do you mean by that? She goes, you know what? If how you feel is only going to be dictated by winning the last game, she goes, you're going to die a very miserable person and you're going to live a very tormented life. And our life is going to be very tormented as well. She says, you're going to have to find another way to gain successes within your program. And that was hard to hear too, much like Coach Winkin. But, she was right. I mean, the reality is this journey, or uh, you can call it journey, the process, whatever you want to call it, these day-to-day interactions that you have with your players and team, that's where the fun is. That encapsulates the fun, because even having you guys all together right around Christmas, the stories that you guys tell aren't the game scores. They're not about, winning an SEC tournament. It's not about going to Omaha. It might be, but you guys aren't talking about the games. You're talking about everything that revolved around what we were doing. And most of that is laughter and the fun and the hijinks and the prank and the words that I may have said, that brought out a reaction among you all. And that's cool. It's tough to say it's cool when you're in the midst of competition because you get lost in winning and losing. But the reality is when you come back to it and you can remove yourself from competition, that's the success. It's the ability to build teams where people want to come back and they want to recreate those memories and emotions that they felt during that time. That to me would be success.
I love it. Well, I think what competition does is it fosters this environment where the trust is required, to where the
Yes.
relationships can be built, to where those stories can really take root. You're absolutely right. I mean, I've sat in those chairs right behind you and we've talked about this very thing. That,
Yeah.
I was texting a former teammate this morning. He's out skiing with his wife in Colorado and he's in a snowstorm and I'm texting him to make sure he's okay. And we're,
Yeah.
bantering back and forth about something that has nothing to do with baseball, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But the relationship started on that field just behind you, and I think
Right.
that really speaks to, and it's transferable to all walks of life, right? It's like you come on campus, you're a part of a college baseball program. Yes, you need to win, and yes, you need to be good, but it's all of the other ancillary things that, to be honest, mean so much more.
They do. And I think like I was saying earlier, that's that journey and it is better than the destination, but you don't realize it until you're in the destination phase. So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's really cool.
Well, I think I've asked you the same thing, and sitting again in that chair behind you, I think you mentioned, the how cohesive of a team that you have in some ways is also another measure of success to you. Again, it's not about what's on the field, but it's how close are the guys in the locker room? How deep are their relationships? Again, and that I think is important for people to hear, because again, that has nothing to do with wins and losses on the field. Oftentimes that equates to wins on the field. But again, I think that can be transferable into all kinds of areas of life, business, family, you name it. And so I think it's important for that to be highlighted.
Yeah. What you said brings me comfort. And what scares the hell out of me is everything that exists in collegiate athletics right now that kind of pulls away from that. Whether it's money, whether it's transferring, all those things that everyone talks about that we all know about, that takes away from the fibers of unification. And that's discouraging. But I always think, okay, that's fine. If that's going to be the system, then we can operate with a system. We're going to do it a different way. And we're going to find a way to be successful within that system. We're just going to do it a different way that brings comfort to us.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we kind of wind down our conversation, I love asking this question, especially for folks that are a little bit older than me that have a little bit more time. What is one thing or two things that you know now, sitting here January 15th, 2024, that you wish you knew when you started coaching that would have saved you a lot of headache and heartache?
Well, I think what we've been talking about is, I think initially early, you're so pushed to just to win. Your knowledge of what success is at the age of 35, 40 is, yeah, build winning teams, regardless of what they look like, to build winning teams. And I think what that does is it brings great internal strife inside of you. And because of that, you you lose your way, not only with what you're doing, but you lose your way inside of your own family too. You can. I mean, the girls and Maggie were such great sports. They're such great teammates in terms of, a stepdad to Molly and Hannah, and you know, a a husband to Maggie. But I just look at Maggie and how she did such a good job, probably, of explaining to the girls, you girls love Tim, but you also know that Tim is going to be like this at certain times if things don't go the way that he feels they should. He, it's not personal. It's not a personal attack. But I can't believe that I acted in a way where she had to communicate that to them. That to me is a little bit distressing, and it's odd behavior. And, I was committing those social crimes within a family. So I think what I know now is doing a much better job of just leaving it here. I think once I get in that four wheeler and pull out of the driveway here at Vanderbilt, it's like once you go home, forget it. Just get it. What are you going to do? You're just going to upset the people around you. It's going to be uncomfortable. They don't need that. Uh, but I think part of that is, it's what I knew back then. What I know better now is more beneficial to me. Happiness and health. I think if you have your health, you have everything. I just get more realistic with who I am and what I'm doing, and just understand that it is about facilitating an environment where people can grow. We have developed a pretty good culture, but cultures over time, it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of effort. And I'm just happy with what we have right here. And Grayson, happy that we could live in the same place for 22 years, because as a coach,
Rare.
that's not common. Yeah, it's really rare, and I don't take that for granted whatsoever.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we close, two more questions. One
Yeah.
for for an individual or even a player, right? I'm biased, but I think that you're one of the best team builders there is. And again, you recruit a lot of players, and you have coaches and staff members that come into your program. And I think that again, your culture now, or the culture surrounding Vanderbilt baseball, is second to none. What are some of the intangibles that you look for in a player that might step into the team, or even a staff member or a coach that you're going to welcome into the program? What are the non-negotiables that you look for personality wise in some of those individuals to know that they would be a good fit within the culture as it exists now?
Well, certainly having a personality is important. Someone who has pretty good social skills and wants to speak up. I think that's
Or
number
who can have some thick skin, maybe?
yeah, thick skin might be required, like rock. Um, but someone who speaks in, like, in the plural, someone who speaks in about groups, someone who speaks about their family with conviction and care. Uh, and care, I think anyone who has just a high care level for what they're doing, whether it's socially, whether it's academically, whether it's athletically, uh, the energy with someone that shows up, no sleepy eyes, someone who's vibrant, someone who wants to be someone who loves baseball, but someone who loves the challenges of being in a very good academic school. But I think when someone's really good at what they do, and as I've said indirectly, when you do what you do, which is baseball, you do it better when you do it for other people. And when someone understands that concept and lives it in what they do, they're going to get along just fine because they're really going to grow as a person, but they're also going to grow in a team environment and cherish that team environment. And when you talk about teams and great teams and legacy teams, which I know I've defined to you guys along the way, it's really getting to a point where they build a legacy team. And a legacy team is something that you leave, something that you want to come back to, and something that you can see when you get married, um, when you have get togethers and a lot of people show up. I mean, you know, that last time that we were together, Grayson, as a team, it will be the last time that we're ever 100% there together. You can never get everyone back, and life happens. And that's not, people want to be back, but they just can't. So I think create an environment where people want to be back as much as they possibly can. That's, you know, those are the people that I want to be around. Those are the people I want in our program.
Yeah. It's important. Again, it's much like giving, right? It's much better to give than to receive.
Yeah.
But also, again, when you're doing things for other people, oftentimes, again, you produce a better product yourself anyway. So I love it. That's awesome. So last question, Corbs, and I'll let you go. And this is a little bit more of a lighthearted one. This is obviously not a finance podcast, but I am a finance guy. So I like asking
Mhm.
a finance question to end our conversation today. If you can think back to your early formative years, what's the first thing that you remember saving for?
Uh, Go kart. I
Go
wanted a
kart.
go kart. Yeah. We had tons of land, so I just wanted a go kart. I never got one though, so it
Well, you
still
still kind
bugs
of
me.
drive a go kart, sort of, kind of now
Yeah.
today. So
Yeah, living out my childlike dreams of driving a Polaris. But
uh,
yeah, that's probably true. There's probably a lot to be said about that. But yeah, I was saving up for a go kart, and I didn't have enough money. And right about the time that we I got enough money, my dad and I put it towards a batting cage. So put a batting cage in the backyard, and then we built an ice rink in the backyard with a pond where our pond was. So I think growing up in that environment, that those are really the things I wanted. Is back then being outside was really important. There weren't computers, obviously, and TV was at a minimum, and it was black and white at that. And so you just didn't have a lot of resources inside. What you had outside is if you were really creative, you could really do a good job of building environments where you could play. And I really enjoyed that.
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Corbs, it's for those that, haven't heard you speak a lot, which obviously there are a lot of abilities to hear you speak. There's a lot of content that you've, been a part of, but it's pretty clear that there's a reasoning behind a lot of the success at Vanderbilt. And, I've said this to you before offline, but I couldn't be more appreciative of the opportunity that you gave me at Vanderbilt and, so many others. So thank you for hanging out a little bit this morning and for giving of your time and your thoughts. You're the man.
You're kind to say that, Grayson. Thank you. Always good time spending time with you.
Of course. Thanks,
Thank
Corbs.
you.